بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Welcome everyone. I am here today to give you an overview for the process of human health risk assessment. According to the US EPA, risk is the probability of occurrence of adverse effect to human health or to ecological system resulting from exposure to an environmental stressor. A stressor is any physical, chemical, or biological agent that can induce an adverse response. There are two areas for environmental risk assessment: human health risk and ecological risk. In this presentation, I am going to concentrate on the process of human health risk assessment. Assessors use risk assessment process to characterize the nature and magnitude of health risk to humans from environmental stressors that may be present in environment. Risk depends on three factors. Number one, concentration of contaminants in environmental media. So how much of a chemical is present in an environmental medium. Number two, exposure. How much contact a person has with the contaminated medium. Number three, inherent toxicity of chemical. So risk assessment is a process in which information on inherent toxicity of a chemical and information on human exposure to this chemical are combined to predict the probability of adverse health effects that may occur. Health risk assessment process includes four basic steps. The step number one is hazard identification. Step number two, dose response assessment. Step number three, exposure assessment. Step number four, risk characterization. The first step is hazard identification. Hazard identification is the process of determining whether exposure to agent in question can cause an increase in the incidence of specific adverse health effects such as disease, cancer, reproductive defects, death, or other effects. This step suffices the available scientific data for agent in question and its adverse health effect. The source of these data are human studies, epidemiological studies, and animal studies, which called toxicological studies. You can search for this information by referring to the website of the International Program on Chemical Safety, IPCS, which is a joint program of WHO, International Labour Organization, and UNEP, United Nations Environmental Program. The second step is dose response assessment. This step examines the numerical relationship between exposure and effects. So it determines what dose create what level of response. Usually, the adverse effects increase with an increase in the dose of toxic chemicals. Dose response relationship normally takes the form of a sigmoid curve. For most effects, small doses are not toxic. The organisms can tolerate a range of exposure, and the threshold toxicity is where the toxicity begins to occur. On this curve, no observed adverse effect level, which is abbreviated as NOAEL, is determined by the highest dose level at which no significant increases are observed in the frequency or severity of adverse effects between the exposed population and its control population. NOAEL is used to calculate acceptable daily intake, ADI, which is the amount of substance in air, food, soil, or drinking water that can be taken in daily over lifetime without appreciable risk of harmful effects. US EPA has used the term reference dose, RFD, in place of ADI. For determination of reference dose, or ADI, the NOAEL is divided by uncertainty factor. If NOAEL is not available, LOAEL can be used for reference dose calculation. Uncertainty factor take into account the variability and uncertainty that are reflected in possible difference between test animals and humans, and variability within human population. RFD values for some chemicals can be found in website of Integrated Risk Information System of US EPA. This program was established by US EPA. The dose-response relationship can be linear in case of carcinogen. It will not take the sigmoid curve. Now we are going to talk about the third step, which is the exposure assessment. Exposure assessment is used to determine whether people are in contact with potentially hazardous chemicals. If yes, to how much? By what route? Through what media? And for how long? Rate of exposure for chemical is typically referred to as average daily dose with units of milligram of chemical per kilogram of body weight per day. The following formula is used for calculation of exposure dose or exposure rate. Exposure rate equal concentration multiplied by contact rate multiplied by exposure duration divided by body weight multiplied by average time. Fourth step is risk characterization. This step is to integrate information provided by the previous three steps in order to develop risk estimates. Risk can be characterized in qualitative or quantitative manner. Non-carcinogenic health risk can be estimated using hazard quotient, HQ. HQ equal to rate of exposure divided by reference dose, RFD. If HQ value less than 1 indicates no significant or acceptable risk. That means risk is acceptable. If HQ value is more than 1, indicate the potential for adverse health effects. Carcinogenic health risk can be estimated using incremental lifetime cancer risk, ILCR, which equal to rate of exposure multiplied by slope factor, cancer slope factor, which can be found in the Integrated Risk Information System, IRS, of US EPA. Some literature consider that, or some regulation consider that ILCR of less than 10 to the power of minus 6 is acceptable. Risk communication is an interactive process of exchange of information and opinion among individuals, groups, and institutions. It involves multiple messages about the nature of risk. Risk assessment results must be effectively communicated to risk manager, legislators, industries, environmental groups, and public. Risk management. Risk manager use the health risk assessment information to help them decide how to protect humans and the environment from stressors or contaminants by selecting the most appropriate regulatory action and developing effective intervention and prevention strategies. Environmental engineering and environmental regulation and environmental risk communication are the basis of environmental health risk management. This brings me to the end of my presentation. Thank you for your kind attention.